Excellent. All right, well, I'll kick off now. Welcome to the Integrated Innovation Network Startup Stories. My name's Siobhan Curran, and I'm the manager of the University of Newcastle's Integrated Innovation Network, or I2N. Before we jump into our event, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm hosting this virtual event on the lands of the Awabakal and Warramai people, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you're all joining us from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. And you can show your respect and awareness of country you're joining us from by letting us know in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. That chat function is also where you can connect and comment with other attendees. And for those of you that are new to the I2N, we're an initiative of the University of Newcastle, and we really have an aim of being a catalyst for regional transformation through enterprise skill development, new venture creation and entrepreneurship. And at the heart of I2N is a strategically positioned entrepreneurship centre in Newcastle CBD at Honeysuckle, which offers co-working facilities that are complemented by mentoring, a range of connection events like Startup Stories, and cohort-based programs like Navigator and Validator, which cover individual enterprise skill development, pre-startup creation, new venture establishment and acceleration, and innovation development for existing SMEs. All industry sectors are supported, extending beyond traditional tech-based startups to include social innovation and creative industries. And you don't have to be affiliated with the University of Newcastle to participate in our programs. So in just under 5 years now of operation, and with the support of the New South Wales Government's Boosting Business Innovation Program, the I2N's welcomed more than 4,000, almost 5,000 innovators and entrepreneurs from a range of different industries and sectors at any stage of their journey. And we have helped fuel and grow and graduate more than 96 businesses. We've just closed our financial year 21 survey, and those that have responded have indicated that they've raised a combination of over $18.6 million in funding. It's fostered the creation of dozens of jobs and work integrated learning opportunities for students. They're acquiring customers, they're winning awards, they're growing their teams right here in the Hunter, and that's really what we want to be able to see. So without any further ado, I would like to just explain a little bit about the outline of the format for this morning's event. So we've taken a number of questions from attendees at registration, and we'll be leading with those after our speaker today provides a brief background on their startup journey, and then we'll open it up to any questions that have been asked via the chat function. So feel free to add any questions that you might have throughout our presenters' presentation today. So one good thing about virtual events is I don't need to point you to the bathrooms or the exits. Hopefully, if you're at home, you should already know the drill. I'm really excited to be able to welcome our guest this morning, Damien Mahoney, who is the founder of Stackla, an AI-powered content management platform, which allows B2C companies to tap into a rich seam of really authentic, trusted and dynamic user-generated content and utilise this content throughout their own digital marketing channels. Damien and his co-founder started Stackla in 2012, and they've since built the company to 65 employees with a global footprint with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, San Francisco, Austin, New York and London. And they're boasting customers including McDonald's, Visa, Lenovo and UMG. Pardon my dog. Their success has not gone unnoticed, with Finnish firm Nosto acquiring Stackla just weeks ago. So welcome, Damien, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us at Startup Stories this morning.
Great to be here, Siobhan. Thanks for having me.
So feel free to share your presentation and we can kick off.
Righto, let's do that. Okay. And that. Let's try that again. Isn't that great? It just doesn't want to do it. Here we go. Righto. Can you guys see that yet?
Not quite.
Now?
Now we can.
Okay, cool. Right. Yeah, as Siobhan mentioned, Damien is my name, and going to give you a bit of a background on not just Stackla, but the years sort of preceding that, because I think that they're important in providing like the full context of the journey and sort of how I sort of ended up doing what I'm doing now. So just a quick background on me. So Newcastle, born and bred, sort of born out in Wallsend, moved to Spears Point and grew up out there. And I'm the founder of Stackla. I've got 2 teen girls who are with me here in Newcastle. On the side, I like to play a bit of music, so playing a band or two, try and keep fit and keep the sort of middle-aged spread at bay. And sometimes I like to play football. I'm sorry, not play football, but watch football now. I'm an AFL fan and a big fan of Hawthorn. And the last point there, like a born entrepreneur, and I'd say I discovered that retrospectively. When I sort of took a look back at my sort of professional career and the things that I've done over the last sort of 20, 25 years, I realised that there was an entrepreneurial streak in the activities that I was undertaking. So I just sort of thought I would explain what that means and run you through a few of those things before we get into the guts of Stackla. So my lucky break was getting a job with the Australian Football League. I was appointed editor of AFL.com.au, and it was like the first real sort of foray that the AFL had made into online. And this is in 1998. The internet was, I guess, a fairly nascent phenomenon, certainly nowhere near what it has grown into now. And it was just an incredible opportunity to be able to utilise my degree, which was a Bachelor of Arts in Communications at Newcastle Uni. I had a love for football. Certainly was writing quite a bit, more or less just sporadic articles, usually about football for Newcastle Herald or other sort of publications in the Newcastle area. I had a computer, I had access to the internet, so I guess that sort of qualified me to get the job. So it was a dream come true and being able to move to Melbourne. But actually, it all started somewhere else. And it was in a pub in Spears Point when I was 8 where I had my first sales job. My parents owned a local newsagent. And once the regular paper boys had done their rounds at Spears Point RSL and Pippi's Hotel, I would jump in and do the last half hour. It was a good time to be working because by that time, a lot of the guys were, 5 or 6 schooners in, very generous with their tips. And it's a good way to make a few bucks at the end of the day. The next sort of part was, you can see a photo there of my footballing exploits. So I played football with Morris Bay. When I was about 20, I decided that, I wanted to explore further my sporting capabilities. My dad was a Socceroo in the 50s, played goalkeeper, toured South Africa, had an incredible reputation in local football circles. And naturally, I thought I was going to inherit that ability. It wasn't necessarily the case, but I did go to Perth, try my hand with West Perth. Lasted a couple of months there, did the pre-season, didn't make the cut. Thought more sensibly I should come back to Newcastle and finish off my university course, which I did. The next thing was chasing rock stardom. So I was in a band called Faceplant. Again, like really trying hard to follow in the footsteps more or less of the Screaming Jets. So I had friends I went to school with who were in that band and was like hell bent on becoming a rock star. Grew my hair long. At the time it was the grunge scene. So, we had earrings and we had cut off army shorts and Doc Martens and heavy metal shirts. And that was the life I lived for a couple of years until I realised, again, that was probably not going to work out for me and thought about some other pursuits. And the next thing was, I've gone forward too far, was Concrete Press. So Concrete Press was a free fortnightly music magazine that I started up with a couple of friends here in Newcastle. I think it was 32 pages long, and it was a bit like a gig guide, but more in depth than a gig guide. We would interview bands that were touring. It was an exercise that we undertook for around 2 years, but the business model around that was just work for free. It was definitely a labour of love. We didn't have any revenue. And so I pulled out of that after a couple of years, but it was a tremendous experience. So all these sort of things led to the lucky break, being the job with the AFL. And so the next 12 years were spent like just honing my skills in pretty much in the online area, working a lot on content creation, content curation. So initial job as an editor, then morphed into becoming a producer for not only content, but for websites. So building these websites, working with my customers, who at the time were clients like the Australian Open, like the AFL, like the clubs. And then I ended up leaving the AFL after around 8 or 9 years, where I also actually started a side career broadcasting. So broadcasting on radio for the ABC and the National Indigenous Radio Service, which again was just something that was just a dream come true for me. On top of getting the job with the AFL, being able to rock up to the MCG on the weekends and talk about football for 5 hours was just fantastic. Then I moved back to Sydney after about 8 years in Melbourne and took on a job at NineMSN, then moved over to Macquarie Radio Network, where we started a news website, which was fantastic. So built out a team of around 15 journalists and producers, producing a full-on news website, which was a great experience. Moved over to the NRL, then there was a fork in the road. So that fork in the road was pretty interesting. So I was offered a full-time job with the NRL, fairly secure job, something in I guess an area that I knew quite well and probably could do without too many challenges. But also had this sort of this desire to do something different and go out on my own and try my hand at whatever it was. Like I built up this experience and expertise. And I thought that there must be a way for me to utilise that to start my own gig, essentially. And I entitled this slide, "Dumb Brave," because the thing that was also on the table alongside this NRL job was a job to broadcast with Triple M, broadcast AFL footy in Brisbane and Sydney. And it was always like a huge ambition of mine to actually work for Triple M. I love their broadcasts. I knew a few of the guys that worked there. And I had to actually knock the same job offer back about 3 years earlier because I was working at a competing radio station. So this job was only like, once a week. It paid like $700-800 a weekend. So it wasn't going to pay the mortgage and it wasn't going to feed my family. I'd just taken on a huge mortgage in Sydney. And the safe and logical decision would have been to have taken the job with the NRL. And because the NRL guy said, look, you can't really go and work for Triple M and broadcast AFL when you're working for the NRL. I thought, yeah, that's fair enough. So I had to make the call, and I made the dumb/brave call of knocking back the NRL job, so the full-time secure job, and working for Triple M. I told that to the NRL, and it sort of worked out for me. They said, okay, look, you can continue to work here. Just work as a consultant. You don't have to come into the office, and you can do the Triple M gig on the side. And there's no conflict of interest because you're not a full-time employee at the NRL. So that was great. Worked out really well. And I said, okay, by the way, I'm just going to work 4 days a week because there's other things I want to do on the fifth day. And so that enabled me to then explore these other opportunities. So the first thing was started this agency called Pillar Sports. It was all about trying to service sporting customers and helping them with their digital strategy. And out of that, I actually ended up getting a really good contract back with the NRL, which was quite a large contract. I had to employ 5 or 6 people to fulfill that contract, including my co-founder, Peter Cassidy, and we started Pillar Sports. And out of that, we ended up really having the capital to explore other opportunities. And that's where Stackla was born. So it was the off season in the NRL. We had time and we had an idea to build this social media aggregation tool, which was Stackla. And we undertook the work to build an MVP, so a prototype of sorts. It took us a few months, but we realized as we continued to build it that this had application outside of sports, and that really any brand that had a presence on social media, had an audience that was generating content, could utilize Stackla. And so we went about getting the MVP ready, and our first customer was SBS. And we'd never really sort of had this like sort of psyche which is quite prevalent in Silicon Valley now, where you had to go and raise capital. We didn't know how to do it, number one, and number three, it didn't really enter our radar. Our whole sort of philosophy was that we need to. We've invested like $200,000 in building this prototype, and now we need to find customers to pay for it. And so the first one was SBS, and then quickly we were able to use our network. So our network was fantastic in sports. So we sold to the NRL, we sold to the AFL, Netball Australia, Cricket Australia, and then we started getting customers outside of sports, so a couple of local councils, including Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne local councils. So we had this early validation that we were able to achieve through our network. And that was further proliferated by getting some really good industry press. So we did a campaign with an agency in Melbourne called Clemenger for Origin Energy. That sort of generated sort of a lot of interest from other agencies who were keen to explore our technology and run campaigns using Stackla. And I sort of missed the whole point of this slide, which is our first office was above a chicken shop. So it was a previously like a gym, I guess a sort of a gym of sorts. So there was this, they had these rubber mats on the floor, and the smell of the rubber mats infiltrated into the carpet. So there was this weird smell of rubber, and then the fat burning from the chicken shop coming up through the vents. So it was an interesting start, modest start, but it was a great start for us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I wanted to sort of talk about yes, how we scale through the different phases of Stackla. So the first one, as I mentioned before, like we just try to get as many customers as we possibly could. And I'm just got Siri has come up for some reason, but I'm just getting rid of Siri. Okay, so yeah, very much measured growth. Like we would get to a particular point where, okay, like we want to hire a CTO and a developer, and we did that, and we're able to comfortably like meet our commitments from just a cost perspective, you know, for those guys. Then we hired a designer and we hired a sales guy, and again, like looking for very sort of incremental growth in how we expanded our team, and then looking at the types of customers that we would like to bring on and attract to the platform. And there was pretty much no limits to that. We just sell to anyone or everyone that wanted to buy it. You know, from selling $3,000-$4,000 licenses to $30,000-$40,000 licenses, depending on what their needs were. We hired a reseller in the UK, which was great, and that got us into brands like Manchester United. He sold to I think about 4 or 5 other Premier League clubs. We sold to the English Cricket Board, the Daily Mirror. So it was really nice to be able to put these logos on our website and show that we were truly a product that had appeal beyond Australian shores. And that really started to validate the product itself, and that, you know, we had a potential market that was, you know, it was global. And we, at the same time, were looking at a couple of investors that we thought about raising capital, because that's what you do. And when we got these term sheets, we thought, okay, we're actually going to give a big chunk of our business for not much money. And I think that in some ways these term sheets felt a little predatory, and they actually were. They were definitely, we were giving up more than what we were getting back monetarily. And in hindsight, it was a good decision to knock back those term sheets. So the next phase, we finally did take some capital. So we hooked up with some guys that we sort of knew through our network, and we took on a little bit over $2 million. And that was all about us, you know, leaving Australia, setting up an office in San Francisco, which we did. But it quickly led to our costs blowing out. Like, so we scaled up really quickly, went from like, you know, 15 to 30 people, you know, in a space of a couple of months. And we realized that the people that we'd hired, you know, there's a lot of salespeople in that, they weren't quite performing at the levels that we hoped that they would. And therefore our cash reserves were starting to run out quite quickly. And within 12 months, we're back raising capital again. So that was definitely a learning experience, and not learning how to scale in a more manageable way, and not sort of putting too high expectations on the people that you bring into the business, expecting them to ramp up over a period of time and not to be generating cash straight away. We also were trying to get repeatable processes in the business, but what we found is we were growing. I wouldn't say we're growing super fast, but I guess we're doubling every year in those for the first sort of 3 to 4 years. We found that those processes had to be changed, and even the people like that we were hiring that we might have hired in year 2 weren't right for year 4. So we had to sort of continue to evolve our thinking around the sort of people that we brought into the business. And then there was learning about the SaaS business model. So recurring revenue, yes, which effectively is a subscription. So customer retention is incredibly important. Learning what annual recurring revenue means, and then all of the different sort of microeconomic measures that you need to be cognizant of when you're trying to build a SaaS business, and the things that, you know, the VCs will look at when they're potentially thinking about throwing money at you. And then 5 to 12. So we ended up bringing in some really seasoned executives into the business. So a very experienced CFO. He'd worked in venture capital for a while, but then was also worked on the operations side of things. And he was a very sort of hard-hitting, typical sort of American CFO. But he was right for our business at that time, and he introduced a lot of structural change into our company. A lot of good disciplines that, you know, we still employ today. We hired a VP of sales. So we previously went for like a really heavy hitting CRO or VP of sales. We were paying him way too much money, and he was just the wrong fit. He was probably would have been a good fit if we were at $20 million, not sort of $3 or $4 million. So the next guy we brought in was what we would refer to as a stretch VP of sales. So a guy who had all of the makings of a VP of sales, but hadn't quite done it yet. He had certainly managed teams in the past, but wasn't sort of in control of the whole sort of shebang when it came to sales. So we brought him on board. We were able to sort of train him and hone his sort of focus in the way that we needed him to do. And he ended up being a great success. He was with us for around 4 years and was able to sort of transform the way that we approach sales. We really invested heavily in people and culture. So just giving people like a career path, knowing that they're valued, definitely setting up a set of values that we wanted everybody to abide by. And we had an executive on our team, our head of people and culture, who was just fantastic. She lived and breathed it. Everybody loved her. And she was really able to instill this, you know, wonderful culture throughout the business. And that was reflected in things like Glassdoor, where our ratings have always been 5 stars. And the people that I think the legacy that we leave with people, and the fact that I think we have a very sort of strong relationship with people that have worked with Stackla. Not all the time, you can always sort of know everybody, but I would say that, you know, 9 out of 10 people that worked with Stackla had a positive experience, and that we remained friends following their tenure. We invest in marketing, so we had to get serious about, you know, building a pipeline. I think that, you know, from up to $5 million, we were able to do it organically, but we had to sort of artificially throw fuel on the fire, started attending events, started spending a lot of money on Google, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and other marketing collateral, like living and sort of, you know, eating our own dog food. So we had to really create content and talk about Stackla and why it was important to our customers, build out case studies, and really start to just become leaders in our field. And so a lot of thought leadership content as well was created. Back office functions, these things are boring, but I think that they're so critical in being able to run an efficient business. So ensuring that our finance function was robust and could scale as we started to grow. Sales ops, so investing in tools like Salesforce, email cadence tools, lead generation tools, and giving our people access to these to make them, you know, more efficient, and being able to scale their activities so that we're able to sort of, you know, build out a much bigger capability with the amount of people that we had. And at that particular time, you know, we were flying. This is sort of 2019. We were headed for like 25% growth off a base of around 10 to 12 million, which was really, really strong. And we had a plan to IPO in 2020. But then everything sort of took a very strange and unfortunate turn. So I had this email come into my inbox from a Business Insider journalist, and he was accusing us of misusing Instagram data, which was complete bullshit. And I won't go into the whole story, but this guy was just I don't know if he was an ambulance chaser or a muckraker. I usually have a lot of time for journalists. I used to be a journalist. I got a lot of friends who were journalists, but this guy was just after blood, and he was just looking to dig up anything that would look negatively upon Facebook or Facebook partners, and we were a Facebook partner. So it ended up in us being in court with Facebook. So if you think about the scale of that, it's like an ant trying to take on a tank. it was a $60 million company versus a $350 billion company, and they don't play nice. They're ruthless, and yeah, we had a 6-week battle to get our access to their platform reinstated. So what that means for us, our product relies very heavily on Instagram data, Twitter data, YouTube data, and when we don't have that, our product still functions, but it doesn't function in the full to the full extent that it should. And so being unable to access Instagram data was pretty critical for us. So it's like effectively trying to run a trucking company without access to any diesel. It's almost impossible to operate. So in this 6-week period, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if we were going to get our status reinstated. We were in the throes of this legal process with Facebook, which wasn't quick, even though 6 weeks might not seem like a particularly long time. It's a long time when you are unable to charge your customers, when you're unable to sign new customers, and when you have like a $1.2 million a month operating cost. And you have got to find out war chest of cash. So about halfway through this particular time, we decided we had to cut our team. So we went from 65 people to around 30 people in one fell swoop. It was one of the worst days you could ever imagine, having to sort of systematically dismantle something that you'd built over 8 years. And it was people. It wasn't just cutting costs like rent or software, things like that. It was people. Having to look people in the eye and tell them they didn't have a job was devastating to see the looks on their faces, devastating for them, and it was devastating for everybody that was had been putting their blood, sweat, and tears into the business over that period of time. And so the good thing is that we got out of it. So we finally, Facebook decided they were going to talk to us, which they hadn't over the first 4 or 5 weeks until we took them to court, and then we were able to basically jump through the hoops that they asked us to jump through, and we got back on, and we continued to operate our business, albeit with half the resources that we had previously from a people perspective. And it wasn't just as simple as like, okay, we're just going to rehire those 30 people. It doesn't work that way. That wasn't quite possible. So we just decided to continue to operate with this sort of reduced team and see what we could do during that time. Then 6 months later, COVID hit. And for some businesses, it was a boom. And for others, it was a bust. For us, it was like a bit of both. We had like 45% of our revenue in travel. And a lot of our customers just either shut their doors or were just unable to pay their bills. And so we had, over that period of time, probably around a 15 to 20% reduction in our revenue. And that was tough for us. So we were trying to work as best we could with our customers to provide flexible payment terms or give them extensions on their licenses with us, but it wasn't always possible, and sometimes we just had to say goodbye to customers. So that made things harder. But in some ways, it was like after going through the Facebook fiasco, it was sort of like water off a duck's back in many ways. I think that we built up a lot of resilience. Our team was hardened, and the people that we kept were very loyal to us. And within that time, that last particular bullet point, it sort of became obvious that we needed to do something. We couldn't just continue to operate in this siege mentality. You're trying to build the business back up to where it was previously. We had to do something, and that was making the conscious decision to sell the business, which we sort of made at the start of 2020. It did take a while. We actually did have a signed letter of intent with one company, but then COVID hit and they withdrew it. So it was just another blow, I guess, that you had to swallow and then move on. But yeah, we did eventually find a buyer, which was Nosto, and we're all very happy that sort of ended up, and we've found a good home for the team, a good home for the product, and everyone was quite optimistic about what we can achieve together. And that's the headline that you never want to see if you're an entrepreneur and working in the space that we do. So the wash up, you certainly can't plan for everything. Like, we were completely blindsided by the Facebook thing, and then COVID happened. It's just like, no matter how risk averse you are or how much you think you can plan for everything, it's just impossible to do so. And sometimes you just got to, just go on and, forge a path for yourself, without sort of worrying about everything that can possibly go wrong, because you can't simply cater for all of it. How strong was the category? Like, I think that's an interesting question. Like, our category, had a lot of momentum early, but it started to become diluted somewhat. So we're all about, telling customer stories and customer content. So it sort of bleeds into things like reviews of products. But all the stuff that we did was very visual. So we were after pictures of products, experiences, and people endorsing their experience with the brand or product through visual content. But it did start to get diluted by text reviews, and also when influencer marketing came in, which is another point I've got in this particular slide, it started to dilute what we were able to do and started to take, I guess, share of mind and share of wallet away from us. Product market fit, it's a similar sort of vein to the category. I think that we had product market fit. We knew who our customer was. We knew how to sell to them, but maybe the take up and the demand wasn't quite as strong as it needed to be for us to get from where we were. We're around $15 million in revenue. Where we're going to get to 50, I'm not sure. And I don't think anybody in our category has been able to get to that level of scale. People. So in that photo on the right, it's when the company was at its height. It was our sort of first big sales kickoff. It was in Vegas. We flew in people from all of our offices. And you live and die by your people. I think that it's probably been said before, but it's incredibly important. If you can attract and nurture and maintain a relationship with key people, it really underwrites the success of your business. They mean so much to you. The people that you work with every day, and that's not just from a skill set perspective, but also from a cultural and just personal perspective. You want to be able to hang out with the people that you work with. You want them to have respect for you, and vice versa. And I think that was something we were able to do really successfully at Stackla. Relies upon other platforms. So this is a big one. The Facebook lesson was a hard one, and it doesn't mean that I don't think it's you should never ever try and build a company that's reliant upon another platform. But I think there needs to be contingency there. I think we're seeing plenty of other companies build on systems like Salesforce or Oracle or Facebook or Apple and be very successful at it. It's not to say that it's fraught with danger, but you do need to be wary of the risks and be able to accept those risks. And the rise of influencer marketing, which I've already spoken about before. And Vegas is a fantastic place for good team bonding. It seems to be very conducive to having fun, but also at the same time, we're able to bond really well. It was a great educational experience for our team. And I think, for young people in a sales environment coming from Australia or the UK, it was really eye-opening for them, and we're able to. The important thing is that we're able to teach them and help them and really accelerate their learning of what Stackla was about as a team. So what's happening now? So the focus for me personally is to make the acquisition work. We've got some big tasks ahead of us. I was just telling Siobhan before I got on this call, it's received an email from our number one sales guy in the US. He's just quit. So that's made our task a little bit harder. So back to the drawing board and trying to find people in an employment market in the US, which is just insane right now. If you're looking for a job, I urge you to go over there and look for work, because they're paying massive money and they're throwing money at anybody and anyone. I'm looking forward to being an employee for a while. So just not having to make every decision myself and working for somebody, I think will be good for just the post-Stackla experience. I think it's important for me to be able to better empathize with people that I work with, what it's like to be an employee. And I'm starting to get a bit of a taste of that now, which is good. I'll be returning to San Francisco, so the plan is to go back there next month and really work hard on the acquisition and the integration of the two companies, and starting to think about what I might do next. I think that for now, the next sort of 2 or 3 years, I'll probably be working, continue to work at Stackla, but beyond that, starting to think about what could be possible. And then, of course, I have this never dying sort of desire to chase rock stardom. And I'll probably give that a crack as well. And I mean that very, very much tongue in cheek. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully that was a good background and a bit of an overview of the journey. And now sort of happy to jump into questions if people have them.
Thank you so much, Damien. That was a really great background. We've got tons of questions. So we're probably got about 20 minutes to try and undertake as many of them as we possibly can. So I'm going to jump in first with a question from Brendan Yell at Twilio, who's asking, how did you get your first customers? So back at the chicken shop.
Yeah. So again, that was our network. We were really lucky that over the 14 years in the same or similar industries, being sport and media, we had built up a tremendous amount of contacts. And the thing was, we could just call somebody or email somebody and they'd take the meeting. And that's one of the hardest things in sales, is just getting that first meeting. And we had basically open doors at all of the professional sporting organisations, all of the media outlets. And it just made sales so much easier. And they were our mates. And I think that one of the key learnings in that is that you don't burn bridges, and that if you leave a job or if there's a relationship, you try and leave it on the best terms possible, because you never know when you're going to need to utilise that relationship at some time in the future. So that was it. Pretty simple.
So what advice would you give then to people who are sort of undertaking the first customer journey right now in a time of COVID, when borders are shut down and face-to-face interactions are really hard to achieve? Do you have any insights there?
Yeah, look, I think it would be incredibly hard. Look, I think it still works more or less the same way. I think that people have adapted to having P2P experiences over Zoom. I think that the same principles still apply. You just need to really work your own networks, and then of course I think that learning how to outbound. I mean that's a very sort of salesy term, but it's a baseline sales skill. Every salesperson needs to be able to outbound, to prospect, and the more that you can personalize that outreach, I think the better. If you can, I think trawling LinkedIn is really a good thing. Looking what people are talking about, news that it's occurring within companies that you want to sell to, trying to tap into some particular point of interest or relevance for those companies is really critical. And I think, the more you can personalize that message, the better.
We've got a question here from Anna Zhang Gowrie, and she's asking, could you explain how you closed your first round of funding? What led you to these investors?
Yeah, again, it was our network. Had a tremendous network. I had friends that worked in Yahoo in the early days. So we were able to tap into some people, mainly high net worths. We weren't so much tapping into venture capital. Venture capital like now compared to where it was then, I think is vastly different. There's a lot more money. I think it's a lot more, they're less risk averse, and their investment thesis is broader and simpler to understand. So we predominantly took capital from high net worths, but I think there were 2 funds that invested as well. So again, just using our networks. And I think that just people you meet, we shared an office with some guys that were trying to build a startup as well, tapped into their network. We got introduced to some investors, and that's where we got another term sheet. So I think it's just, understanding that the more that you can get out there, which again, I guess is hard in COVID. There's not too many co-working spaces operating right now, but that's not going to be forever. And just utilising the people that you meet and learning about them and how they might be able to help you.
We've got a question here from Darren Gow, who's a founder at Y-Drive, and they're asking, what is the key piece of financial advice you would give an entrepreneur at the start of their journey?
Financial advice. Look, I think it's important to. One of the things I think the lesson that I learned was not keeping a laser sharp focus on where our finances were at. I ended up as we grew to say 25, 30 people, we brought in a part-time CFO and more or less a financial controller. And I sort of stepped back a little bit from monitoring that. And that's where things went haywire. It's like, it's amazing that, I had these people in place, but I remember having a meeting with them too. Oh, we've got about 2 months of cash left. It's like, right. That would have been good to have known maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So that we could maybe make some sort of contingency. But I think that just making sure that you have very sort of strong handle on where your finances are at, your cash position. I think that for us, the organic growth of the company was enough for us to sustain a level of growth that was comfortable, that gave us, the feeling that we were growing. We were bringing on probably 3 or 4 customers every month, and if they're paying between $5,000 and $20,000, that's a nice sort of clip of growth. And the key, obviously, then was to maintain those customers, which we learn after a while. But I think that financial advice that comes out of that, it's really just being able to sustain a level of growth that is maintainable and attainable by the resources that you have, and not sort of overstepping the mark and expecting outsized results from the resources that you have.
We've got a question here from Erin Curry, who's a community coordinator at Dashworks at Lake Macquarie. What are some of the invaluable resources that assisted you during your journey?
Well, I think I've sort of harped on this a bit, but the network, absolutely. It's people getting to open doors, so on and so forth. I think, and also I think the enthusiasm and the excitement that comes with building the product, getting your first couple of customers, seeing it live with customers. Those things were huge spurs for us. Looks like this is real, this is happening. We can do it, and we can sell it. And those little sort of validation points just drive, particularly for Peter and I, just drove tremendous belief. And it was just that spur. It's like, okay, we're going to put more time into this. We don't care if we're working 10, 12 hours a day. It's worth it because we can see the results. So I think that was not so much a lesson, but just like a part of the journey that if you're not getting that, then you need to think about what you're doing. And if it's a slog and you're not getting that satisfaction and that validation somewhere along the journey or at regular intervals along the journey, then maybe you should rethink what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. We've got a couple of tech questions here. So Dane Steggles at Benedict Recycling Newcastle asks how much machine learning driving Stackla worked out as well as you've planned. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. So has the machine learning driving Stackla worked out as well as you've planned? And do you see it changing in the future?
Yeah, I think it did. Like the baseline things that we did, like image recognition. So, being able to identify particular objects in an image or a video, that stuff works really well. Yeah. And we were able to sort of spread that all throughout our customer base just to make searching really easier. I think that the area that I think that in hindsight we should have done better. So we built this predictive intelligence, which would learn like your preferences from a publishing perspective. So it's like, Siobhan likes to publish pictures, of beach scenes with families. And they're generally pictures that are collected from the West Coast of America. So we could learn all that sort of stuff and then basically provide recommendations to the publishers within our tool. It's just the sort of stuff that you like, and this is what you should, this picture is like what you would previously publish. But we didn't really implement that. We sort of held it back for our enterprise customers who were paying us more money because we felt as though it was one of the key elements of our platform that we could charge for. Probably in hindsight, we could have allowed some of our lower level customers access to that or made it more freely available to those customers. And so, it definitely worked. It made our product more efficient and more valuable. But I think that we could have been more just liberal with how we gave other customers access to it.
And then we've got another question here from Andrew Rutherford, who's the founder of BrandSynth. At what point in your career did you realise there was a gap in content-based marketing, and what made you believe Stackla's underlying tech was the best solution?
Yeah, so I think was there a gap? Yeah, we sort of thought about it as a gap. I think that like one of the things that we noticed that like, because when we had the agency and in previous jobs, we were using the old model of content creation, which was, you create long form news content. It takes, you got to go out to the field, you interview somebody, you come back, you write it, it gets sub-edited, you publish it, you find a photo. It was a long and drawn out process, and it wasn't really reflective of what the medium, being online, was capable of. But what we saw is, with social media, it was so immediate. It was direct. It could be posted in seconds. So somebody could be at an event, they could post it, take a picture on their phone, and it was up. And then also the phones were a key part of it. Like the smartphone proliferation basically put the power of content creation in the hands of billions of people. And so these networks became so dynamic. And so this was an opportunity to sort of flip the content creation model on its head. And has it really changed things? It has and it hasn't. I think that social media will always have a role to play in content creation, and it's a key part of it. My sort of vision was to see like an editor sitting there and just posting social stuff as his news source. So you go to you go to the Newcastle Knights website, and the majority of the information would be disseminated from social media, either created by the club themselves or by the players or by fans or the media. And this is a way to sort of tap into everything else that was out there rather than taking on the cumbersome and burdensome process of creating content yourself. So it hasn't quite got there, and that vision was never quite realised, but I think it's there in some way, shape or form. I think that that was the gap. It's been fulfilled to an extent. And I think like our product, it was capable of it. All of the events that we did initially were live events. So we did like live State of Origin. We did like live Coachella, where you could sit and watch these things unfold. And it was I guess it was almost like a second screen experience that we were initially putting out there. But I think the whole business model and the whole focus for the product has changed since then. It's about just being able to find really cool content that's created by customers, which is authentic. It's relatively cheap to source, and it provides a different voice for brands.
Adam Boyle, who's CEO at Pegasus, wants to know if you're a better entrepreneur or a better AFL player.
Oh, that's debatable. I was an average AFL footballer, probably an average entrepreneur as well. They're probably neck and neck.
We've also got a question here from Owen Hewitt, who's a developer at Casual Connect. They're asking, how have you monetized Stackla, and has it always relied on the same type of revenue stream? So you've touched on that a little bit already, but if you can go into a little bit.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's a SaaS business model. It's all about recurring revenue. I think that within that, it's about like knowing your customers is probably the key thing, and knowing which customers to focus. Like as I mentioned at the start, we just sell to anyone that wanted to buy it. In the end, we just focused on 4 key verticals, which is travel, automotive, not-for-profit, and retailers. We felt as though the use case for our product was strongest in those verticals. It was big enough to be able to grow our revenue base to the extent that we wanted to. And then everything else just falls in behind that. Your marketing, the types of salespeople that you hire, your training, your product roadmap, all falls in behind that. So I think that those things are quite important when you're thinking about, the business model is recurring, but then those other things are really key in being able to focus. And then I think when you focus, you become far more efficient.
So this is a good segue then to Raylene Box's question, who's at Beyond Your Ordinary. How do you decide which market to scale into next? So you made the choices around those 4 particular verticals. What were the sort of the metrics that you were looking at in terms of making those decisions?
There were no metrics. It's like, okay, we're going all right in Australia. It's got a population of 25 million people. The US is 330 million. The UK is 90 million. They're way bigger. There's got to be customers there we can sell to. There was nothing scientific about it. Really, I think the biggest challenge was just working out the people to hire, particularly like if you hadn't met them. So that really involved us like getting on planes and flying to San Francisco and interviewing people and getting comfortable with the individuals that we hire, and then eventually moving there. So that was the way that we did it. There was no data points or science or scientific approach to it.
Do you think that that would have changed though if you were looking to capital raise, where the investors would want those data points? Like, do you think you would have interrogated that a little bit more?
No, I think that like just the similarities with like this market and the US and what we were doing, like we were selling to, you know, big B2C brands, and Australia is as good as a market as any to test in. I think that's one of the great things about Australian businesses and entrepreneurs who are looking to start businesses in Australia. I think that if you're trying to eventually go global, this is a great test market. Get lots of early customer feedback. I think that Australians are fairly early adopters when it comes to technology. They're willing to give things a crack, particularly if you're local. I think they'll give you a chance. And then, I think that if you do well here, you can usually do well in the bigger markets.
Chris Webb's asked a question. What was the recent acquisition planned, or had the offers and process happened earlier?
No, it was definitely planned. I think that once we had sort of gone through two very tough periods, we realised that to get Stackla back to where it was, we weren't going to be able to do it underneath our own steam. And look, in some ways, there was a lot of fatigue in the business, like particularly from Peter and I and the team. We were tired. We were tired of sort of just trying to operate against the odds, and we needed some sort of artificial boost to get us back up and just help us feel invigorated again. And that certainly happened with Nosto.
I might just jump to a couple of questions from the Q&A. So we've got a question here from Maddie. Why the name Stackla? What's the meaning behind it?
Oh yeah, there was at the time there were very few .com domains left, and in the early days, the display that we had, it was tiles. It looked like sort of Tetris, and when you loaded the page, the tiles would stack up. And therefore the notion of a stack became part of our vernacular. And then I'm not sure why the LA got put on the end. It was just, I think it was maybe a trend with how companies were being named back then, and Stackla.com was available, and we took it and ran with it.
Claudio Sanhuza is asking, assuming not all the clients are the same, have you ever declined clients that are too high maintenance or for other reasons?
Yeah, we got quite disciplined with that, in that we would often get like small customers who were not willing to pay the entry level price for our product, which was it's around $20,000. So if somebody came in and had a budget of 8 or 10, we'd say, look, no, you're probably not going to. The investment that you make in this platform is probably not going to be worth it for you guys. So you should try these other competitors. So we got fairly disciplined in that regard, because our focus, particularly with the way we built the tech and the way that we build our API suite and wanting to scale our product for enterprise brands, our focus was mid-market upwards. So we had definitely knocked back customers and deliberately turned away from a segment of the market that we felt was just going to be more trouble than what it was worth.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned earlier that when COVID hit, you were really impacted revenue-wise from your travel clients. So Lawrence Lockleys asked, how did you manage to find a buyer when that revenue stream had fallen?
Yeah, it was tough. Like, I think that it's difficult to sell something that has declining growth, particularly in this day and age when it's all about growth. And look, I think that we had 8 years of history. We had 8 years of customers. We had 8 years of product investment. So the product was still good. I think that even though we sold a lot to travel, we also had very strong use cases for our product with retailers and e-commerce, and our buyer came from is purely an e-commerce play, so they saw the value in what we were doing, and for those guys it made sense because they had 2,500-3,000 customers they could sell it to straight away. The business was still profitable, so even though our revenue was declining, like we were operating at a very tiny profit, and we just so we went down like 25%, but then we sort of flatlined. So we were able to stabilize everything. And then we actually also had like a very sort of small uptick in the first 2 quarters of this year. So it wasn't like just going down all the way. Like there were signs of recovery. And I think that for the acquirer and Nosto, it just made a ton of sense. We're going to be able to put 2,500 customers in front of Stackla, and we can help facilitate sales of their platform into these customer base. So I think that all of that worked out. And like the core team was still there. Like even though we'd shed like half of our team, and we lost some great people, we still had the core. So like the key people were still in the business, and I think that's pretty critical when you're looking at acquisitions of this size.
Yeah, for sure. This is probably a really challenging question to answer, but Cameron Moore at Tilter's asking, what was it like to take on a company like Facebook, and how did you remain positive throughout that ordeal?
Yeah, it was pretty hard. I just remember like the feeling in my stomach when I read the emails that came through, from their lawyers, and, the like, and having to tell our board and tell our team what was happening and how dire it was. That night I had a complete meltdown. I was home alone, and had things sort of happening in the previous 6 months of my personal life that were devastating as well. And then to have this sort of, I always thought, okay, despite that personal stuff, the business is going well, and it's something I can sort of pour my time and effort into. And then that happened, and then all of a sudden I was looking over a cliff, really like it. 8 years of work sort of going down the drain. So it was gut wrenching. It was like sleepless nights for the duration of that period. And it was interesting. Like I remember, like I was lucky enough to live sort of across the bay from San Francisco, and every sort of evening I could see the lights of San Francisco. It was almost like it was the battlefront, and knowing I'd have to go in there the next day and just fight this fight that almost seemed impossible, and was just so much so much was relying upon that fight. But at the same time, like as tough as what it was, like I think that most people who are put in that position, you got to fight. Like you get backed into a corner, and you come out swinging. And it seems like, why would you take Facebook to court? So, well, we had no choice. We had to take them to court. It was either that or close the doors. And like we were literally weeks away from closing the doors. And if we didn't sort of undertake that fight and sit in a courtroom in San Francisco and stare down Facebook over the other side, we wouldn't be where we were today. Like, and we would have closed the door. And look, and it was interesting, like, because we had litigation funders, and these are basically people that will invest in lawsuits, and they were knocking on our desk, like, we'll give you $10 million, we'll give you $15 million to take Facebook to court. But it would have meant, shutting the business down and sacking everybody and being 2 or 3 people. And that didn't feel like a very sort of noble or path that we were interested in doing. So we prefer to come out of it legit, clear our name, and battle on. And that's what we did.
It's fantastic. Fantastic outcome. I've got one last question from you, and this comes from Abby Bryant, who's a student at the University of Newcastle. She says, I'm using Stackla at my internship and was wondering, when faced with a roadblock, was there ever a time that you've had to let another team member take the lead on figuring out the solution?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I think that's one of the things that you learn, particularly like we were 60 people. So, we don't have all the answers. And I think that's one of the really key things is that I failed to sort of probably mention this sort of component when the bullet point that mentioned people. Like, you've got to hand over the reins to people, and you've got to hire people that know more than you about certain things. Like we didn't really know about marketing. We brought on a girl who was just an absolute guru with marketing. Like, she knew what it was to build a pipeline, the different stages of the pipeline, and she taught us. And it was the same it was the Facebook thing. Like, we hired external attorneys to fight the battle for us. we needed our internal product team to to do a lot of work in making sure that we were compliant with Facebook and helping us prove our case. The COO that we hired, I handed over a lot of responsibility to him. Our VP of sales ended up learning, even though I drove sales for the first $2-3 million of revenue, he ended up driving the next 8 or 9, and he was way better than what I was. So there's moments when you need to understand that this person or this individual that you've hired is better at their job than what you were or what you are. And you've got to give them the rein to do that. And I think if you read lots of books around leadership, that's an important trait in a leader, sort of knowing when to give people the ability to develop and grow and make decisions themselves without you.
Thank you so much, Damien, for your time. It's been a fascinating journey. And I know that we probably could have gone for longer. There are questions that have remained unanswered, so we might have to invite you back for another Startup Stories in a couple of years' time when you're thinking about your new venture. In the meantime, I did just want to quickly highlight a couple of opportunities that we've got coming up at the I2N. So later on this month, our Join the Dots series, sorry, I don't know if that's displaying correctly, but nevertheless, the details for Join the Dots, the link to register for that is in the chat. The theme is clean tech, and we've got some great presenters who will share a little bit about who they are and what they're working on in this space in the Hunter region. And then we're going to open up for virtual networking using the iSeed platform. So if you haven't used iSeed before, it's a really great way to be able to network effectively online. And our next Startup Stories is Jacqueline Garrett from GGWP Academy, which I just learned yesterday means good game, well played, because I'm not a gamer. So this is going to be an interesting interview, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions that we might get from the gamers out there on this particular story. So join us on the 1st of September at 8 o'clock via Zoom. In terms of programs that we've got, if Damien's story has spurred you to consider finally kicking the can down the road and starting that startup idea of yours, you can always join up to Entrepreneurship 101, which is our online program that sort of teaches you the fundamentals and maybe some of those terms that Damien was talking to you about today, like MVP and CAC and all those kinds of terms will be made known to you through Entrepreneurship 101. And of course, if you're a venture with a founder that's affiliated with the University of Newcastle or an I2N program, you can put in an expression of interest to be mentored by a team of mentors through Venture Mentor Service. So hit up our website for details about how to get engaged in that. That's it for Startup Stories. Again, thank you so much, Damien. We really appreciate your time, knowing that you're working in different time zones and have a lot of demands on your time over a 24/7 hour period. We really appreciate you making the time available to us today. So thank you so much.
No worries, Siobhan. It's great to be part of it. Thank you.
And everyone, I hope you have a really great day today. Enjoy, stay safe and stay sane.